Welcome to session 5 of Tile Basics. Today we'll be going through how to clear data. We'll set up a test information panel that will go on the graph, and we'll go into detail on graph properties. Basically, how to make the data look how you want it to look, because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to look at the most. So we'll take that down. Now we're back into the profile that we had resuming from session 4. And we're just going to, right off the bat, just jump into it. In our clear data path, we'll get the clear icon, the clear action, which kind of looks like an eraser or a prism. We'll drop them over here, and we'll just connect through from the go to the clear and to the return. So now we'll save this. So now if we run it and go to the main menu, we can clear the data out. After you open up and add the data items to be cleared. So we can run this, clear the data, and there we go. And if we actually go to the run test path, we can sweep the horizontal, go to the run test path again, sweep the vertical, and we've got our data back. So that's how this flow works. The next thing that we'll work on here is adding the EUT information. When we set up the graph and configure it, there's going to be some data we'll want to put in the corner. There's going to be different things to turn on, like a timestamp, the test file. We'll change the font sizes. We're going to handle all of that in this lesson. But one of the first things people would like to see is information about their item and their operator on the graph. So what we'll do is we'll go grab this function in the palette called EUT. It says EUT and has a paper clip on it, and we'll put it out here, and we'll open it and we'll call it EUT info, and go ahead and connect it through to the return as well. Okay, and in the EUT info, I'll execute this. I won't do a go and do the whole profile, but I'll execute this panel. And in its default state, what it does is it allows the operator to fill all this information in. But adding all this information to the graph makes things very busy. You either need to switch, shrink the plotting area of the graph or have very small text. So what I've done with customers in the field, and 90% of them have just stuck with, is I go into the properties of the action, turn the equipment description off, turn the equipment under test page 2 off, just deactivate the shows, and then in this page I do model number, serial number, test mode, whatever the mode of operation is, and the operator. So we could say the model is a Acme Series A, and the serial number is 00017. Test mode, operate, and then the person running the test, the operator's me, L. Sheridan. So we enter that information and hit OK. Now it's retained in this action, and what we'll come to is as we modify the graph, that information we can add to the graph, and I'll show you how. So when you're in the graph properties, there's a number of things here that you can do. You can add another graph. You can export the data. In fact, if we click the export, it'll give us options. We can export as an EMF, a WMF, or a PNG, whichever you prefer. Then we got this refresh button, and what the refresh button is you can change your view in the graph on the fly. You can actually right-click and highlight an area and zoom in on it, okay? And then you can either double right-click your way back, or you can hit refresh and refresh your way back. The other thing I like to point out while we're here is, it may be difficult to see on your screen, but as you move your mouse around the screen, there's kind of a cross-haired cursor that follows you. And wherever that cursor is, in the lower left corner of the graph is a live frequency and amplitude display of that point. So if I go to this large peak and then look down in the lower left corner, I can see that the frequency is 99.84 megahertz and the amplitude is 79.87 dB microvolts. So that's kind of a useful feature. You can go look and search for peaks and look at different information. But let's get into how to make the graph look better, okay? In its default state, it's very plain and the font's very small. There's these two hashed menus, the horizontal lines. We call them the hamburgers. So the right hamburger is the data settings. It controls what's actually on the graph, what the actual plotted data is and the colors and things. And we'll be doing a lot more of that as we go through the other sessions, setting markers and limit lines and other things. The left hamburger, the settings itself, you've got data items on the right, settings on the left. The left hamburger has all the different graph properties. So what I like to do is start out by making the title of the graph, what it is. So this is, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to split this data. So we're going to call this horizontal graph. And the first line will be the company name. So we can just say, it's Acme Incorporated. And the last line, radiated emissions. Acme Incorporated, we'll just say it's their EMC lab, okay? Now, in my case, I like to left justify these, and you'll see why when we're done. So when you do this, you get this information up in the upper left-hand corner. And what I want to highlight about that is when you export a graph, whatever is in the title field, whatever is in there, that is what the graph will be called. And it works for tables too. So it'll take horizontal graph.png, horizontal graph.emf, horizontal graph.wmf. That's what the file name will be. And that's determined that way because when we do automatic saving, as long as you have a unique name for every graph and table, they'll all get saved that way. So other things that I like to do is the fonts are quite small. And when we're scaling for different resolutions, we're scaling for different word processors, we basically have to use a true type font. So what I'd like to get off straight away is just go into the font tab, make the top two items size 12 and the rest of them size 8 or size 10 rather. Go 12, 12 and then the rest 10. And when you hit OK, you can see that the text becomes a little bit more legible. In the additional information tab, we want to select a date timestamp. We want to include the file name. These things will appear in the lower left-hand corner of the graph. I do not recommend the full path because if you save to a complex network path, the name will get quite long and could take over the bottom of the graph. So I use file name only and hit OK. And you can see we now have our timestamp at the bottom, very detailed down to the second, as well as the file name of the graph, or the file name of the profile. We also have places we can add different comment boxes around, and we can also add the EUT. And this tab is specially linked to the EUT function. So in this tab, I can say display the floating data, include the titles, and then grab this information. Now tile will automatically, this is from way back, old tile 3, tile 4, will throw kind of this default box, blue box around it. I always turn that off by just changing the color to white. And then I address kind of the location of all this information by tucking it into the upper right-hand corner. And kind of the secret sauce for that is to go 75 left, 3% from the top, and then 15, 15. And it'll tuck right up there in the corner and look really neat. So these are kind of the basics of how I like to set up the graph. Also with the legend, if I choose to display it, I'll also take the border from around it And I like to kind of just put it right up in the upper left-hand corner inside the graph itself. So from the left-hand side, it'll be 16%, and from the top, it'll be 21%. That'll put it just inside this corner. And there you have, your legend items. So that's the graph. Let's save our progress here. And you can tell in the graph legend how we have just this, the data name. Well, what we can really do is we can go into the settings, and where it says first description of the display data, instead of putting this name in, if we enter something in this block, it'll replace it. So we can say horizontal data, and under vertical, we can say vertical data. And now we've got a graph that makes a little bit more sense, or we've got a legend that makes a little bit more sense. So that's really how we get the graph, pull the graph together, really make it look like something more useful for you. And as we go through the lessons, we will be working more with this and adding information and markers and limits. But right now, the one thing I'd like to do is show you how I'd like to have separate graphs for horizontal and vertical. Well, now that we have the graph configured the way we'd like to see it, we can now go into graphs. We can right click on the horizontal graph, click copy, and then click paste, and we get another graph. When we open that graph up, all we really need to do to make the change is go call it vertical graph, eliminate the _1, hit OK, and then we can go remove the horizontal data. So we only have vertical data, and then in the horizontal graph, we can remove the vertical data, so we only have horizontal. So now we have two unique graphs that look very similar, have unique names, and if we exported them automatically, they would export next to each other. So at this point, we're done with the graphing lesson. We're caught up, and we're going to move on to session 6.